Hi everyone. We begin with a new chapter. It's Trade, Chapter 3 in the same ebook. And we won't be covering international trade for about now. So, just general concepts like on what basis countries or people trade. So, this chapter would revolve around absolute advantage and comparative advantage. So, you all are aware that trade is the exchange of goods and services across national and international borders. But it's also important to know that trade is not just exchange of goods and goods or goods for money, but it's also exchange of services. For example, if you are good at mathematics and your friend is good at English, so you can teach him English and he can teach you mathematics, that's also trading of services because at the end you both would be better off. That's how trade allows countries and even individuals to specialize in whatever they do best. That's how trade makes everyone better off. But why people and nations trade? In order to know this, you need to understand the concept of absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Absolute advantage is the ability to produce a good using fewer resources than other producers. So here we have an example of two producers, China and Malaysia. Both of them are producing cars and bikes. But what is the resource here? As in, I haven't mentioned labor or the limitation of funds. So here it's written annual production, as in yearly production. So time is your input in this example. So let's see which producers have an absolute advantage, either in cars or bikes or in both goods. So let's begin with China. So we see China can produce 50 cars in a year, whereas Malaysia can only produce 40 cars in a year. So comparing these, you know that China produces more cars. So China has an absolute advantage in production of cars because in less time, China can produce more cars. For bikes, China can produce 100 bikes in a year, whereas Malaysia can manufacture only 20 bikes in a year. So again, we see China has an absolute advantage in production of bikes as compared to Malaysia. So the answer is China possess an absolute advantage in production of both goods, which is cars and bikes, because in limited amount of time they are producing more commodities. Very simple, you do not have to calculate anything. You look at the numerics and you can simply tell which of the producers have an absolute advantage in which commodity. From the latest example, we figured out that China possesses an absolute advantage in production of both goods. So does it imply that China should be manufacturing both goods? Well, the answer is no. Nations never trade on the basis of absolute advantage. They always trade on the basis of comparative advantage. Even if, let's say, China or any country has absolute advantage in production of maybe all of its goods, it's not possible that they can also have comparative advantage in production of all goods. Because in comparative advantage, we compare opportunity cost of producers, and the producer with lowest opportunity cost produces that particular good. So let's see what is comparative advantage and how do we compute opportunity cost. As I mentioned, nations always trade on the basis of comparative advantage. It's the ability to produce a good at a lower opportunity cost than another producer. So a quick back to opportunity cost. You know it's the value of next best alternative, or in simpler words, it's what you give up to get something. Remember, your emphasis should be on the values or whatever you sacrifice in order to gain something. So to compute comparative advantage, we need to calculate per unit opportunity cost. And for that, you know the definition and you put it into a formula. It's amount you lose over amount you gain. As I mentioned before, it is possible that a country can have absolute advantage in everything they produce, but it is not possible they also possess comparative advantage in everything they produce. Because for comparative advantage, we compute opportunity cost, and the country or a producer with lowest opportunity cost should be producing that particular good. So that's why we have two questions here. Which country possess comparative advantage in production of cars? And which country possess comparative advantage in production of bikes? So I'll be using the same example to calculate opportunity cost. So we have two producers, China and Malaysia, and they're producing cars and bikes. And looking up the information we have, China possesses an absolute advantage in production of cars and bikes because China is producing more products within the same time than Malaysia. But what about comparative advantage? So, you know the formula of opportunity cost, it's what you give up, as in what you lose, over what you gain. So, we are calculating per unit opportunity cost, as in what is the opportunity cost of one car or what is the opportunity cost of one bike. So, let's see for China. For China, in order to produce 50 cars, they have to give up 100 bikes. So it's 100 by 50 and the answer is 2. This 2 is opportunity cost. How do you interpret it? In order to produce 1 unit of car, China is giving up 2 units of bike. And what is the opportunity cost of bike? It's in order to produce 100 bikes, China is giving up 50 cars. So it's lose over gains 50 by 100 and the answer is zero point 0.5 as in 1 by 2. So it means that in order to produce 1 unit of bike, China is giving up half unit of car. Now let's compute opportunity cost of Malaysia for car and bike. So if Malaysia spends all time making cars, it means they're giving up making 20 bikes. So it's 20 by 40 and it's 1 by 2, as in opportunity cost of one car is giving up half bike for Malaysia. And for bikes, it's 40 by 20 and the opportunity cost is 2 cars, as in order to manufacture one bike, Malaysia is giving up 2 cars. So now we compare the opportunity cost with respect to producers and the goods they're producing. So let's focus on cars first. So if China produces 1 unit of car, it means China is giving up 2 units of bike. And if Malaysia produces 1 unit of car, it only gives up 0.5 or we can say half unit of bike. It means that Malaysia should be producing cars because Malaysia is giving up less units of bike. Then what about China? So coming towards bikes, we see that opportunity cost of one bike is half cars for China, whereas opportunity cost of one bike is equal to 2 cars for Malaysia. So it means Malaysia has to give up more cars to produce bikes, but China has to give up less cars to produce bikes. So China should be producing bikes and Malaysia should be producing cars. That's how you compare opportunity cost. But what about terms of trade, as in on what basis you trade? Remember, there is no specific formula to calculate terms of trade, but It lies between the two opportunity cost, that is 2 and zero point 0.5. So maybe 1 or maybe 1.5, because if you're giving the producer same opportunity cost, so how they are better off? They can produce that good and they're giving up same opportunity cost. So you have to give up something more than their opportunity cost. So that's terms of trade. And we're done with this chapter. I have an application question for you. Which producer possess an absolute advantage in production of both or either goods? And which producer possess a comparative advantage in production of hats, in toys, and what are the terms of trade? So you have two producers here, A and B, and they both are producing hats and toys. And now you have to solve these questions. So please read the chapter in detail to understand everything.